614 Startups Nation, welcome to another episode of the 614 Startups podcast. And we took the bus on the road today. We are riding on the freeway and we are parking this thing in Indianapolis. This is our first time outside of the state of Ohio, but welcome my very special guest, Miss Kelli Jones, managing partner of 68 Capital and also one of the co-founders of the Be Nimble Foundation. Kelli, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you here. We had another conversation offline. We thank God that you could be here. We thank God that you're feeling better. So,
Yeah.
Hey, I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since I learned about the work that you guys are doing at Be Nimble and at 68 Capital. We're going to get into all of that great stuff, which is what I think the audience really wants to hear because everybody is buzzing about venture capital in the Midwest. But I want to take the time to get to know you. So why don't you share a bit about your personal and professional background?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana, which is not the most exciting place in the world, but it is home. I actually spent most of my career outside of the Midwest. I lived over on the East Coast for quite a long time, almost 8 years. And then also lived on the West Coast, which is where I really got into tech. I started as a founder and then later became an operator and really found my place in really ensuring that more people of color had an opportunity to take part in the innovation economy. And so when I decided to move back to Indy in 2017, I thought it was a great opportunity to really bring back all of the relationships I've had and people I've met and things I've done, and really allowing myself to pour back into our community. So I came all the way back just for that.
Okay. And what is that feeling that I feel like, and it probably is cross cultural, but I only know it from the Black perspective. When you go into a field and you don't see yourself, that feeling like something doesn't quite feel right here. I need to do something about it. Was it so glaring in tech that you had to do something, or is that a feeling you've always had regardless of the space that you were in?
You know, it was interesting. And it's because the beginnings of my career were at the intersection of tech and entertainment. So I own and ran an experiential marketing agency where all of my clients were startups. And on top of that, most of my clients were white startups, right? And because I worked in entertainment, specifically the hip hop industry, I was working, doing like concerts and events and like large music festivals. My culture was the people that was being catered to, but the people with all the money were the startups that were coming in to be present. And I think, my first indication was one, I think the music industry needs to understand, and I think they do now, but I would say back then when I first started, I don't think the music industry, especially the people that were participating in the music industry, artists, audio engineers, producers, really didn't realize how much the music industry is only built on tech, right? Like when you think about how music is made, how it's marketed, how it's distributed, all of that is tech, right? That was back when the blogs were popping, Two Dope Boys and Hip Hop DX and all those kind of places. And so literally everything that we had done had been in tech and we were running it, but we owned none of it. And that was my first indication, right? And so when I switched from being a founder or, an entrepreneur to an operator, it was actually after I worked with, I think I spent 1.5 years, almost 2 years, working solely with music technology companies, both hardware and software, doing the same stuff, event activations, go-to-market stuff, in-person events, and later ended up working for Akai, and Young Guru, who's Jay-Z's DJ and engineer, was a brand ambassador on that with Akai at the time. And when we finished our engagement, asked me to join his team. And, Young Guru brilliant, like one of the smartest people I've ever known, is Jay-Z's DJ, an engineer, a photographer, like he's all of the things, right? A creative, a tech guy, like all of these things, Howard grad, like he checks all the boxes, but is also brilliant and really told really great stories and connection points to why music and technology was important and why Black people needed to be in it more often, right? So I think it was the combination of like my experience, knowing that we are controlling a medium that we own nothing of, to working with someone that worked in that medium, also trying to convince Black people to be in tech. And at that point, like I said, I got the bug, and I was stuck on it, and it became my mission. And it's been my mission, since at this point, 2010 is when I started kind of on this journey. And so then I moved out to LA and ended up working for Hip Hop DX as director of sales and marketing, and then later moved to Blavity, and got this opportunity to really think differently about what showing up really looks like. And for me, it all meant ownership. It no longer meant to me, let's get people jobs at, let's get people jobs at other Black-led companies so that we don't have to worry about what it looks like when we don't have any ownership, right? Like, let's have ownership be representative from the top to the bottom. And I think that's the thing that's driving me. That's the thing that keeps me motivated every day. It's the thing that keeps me waking up every day. It's also the thing that I think keeps us going and keeps our work really relevant. And I think that's why it's become so important.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where, at a very foundational level, it's that desire to belong, right? It's that some things just don't need to be said. It's that head nod you could give, and like just some things don't need to be said. So for me, it's at that foundational level. But then, like you said, it's on the ownership level and wealth creation.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, it's job creation, right? It's the ability not to only make yourself wealthy, but to bring others along and make them wealthy, and then graduate to that next level where now you're investing in people with the wealth that you created, not only for yourself, but the people who were part of your founding team.
Absolutely.
And so how did that manifest itself after, you kind of worked in the music industry and then made that leap to tech? How did that desire to do exactly what you've just explained manifest itself in the work that you're doing at Be Nimble and now at 6eight Capital?
Yeah. So I first learned about accelerators in, I believe, probably 2013, I believe. I think it was before I moved to LA. And it was around the time that they were spinning up. So Techstars was like the first company I learned about that did accelerators. And they were spinning up, they had just started spinning up industry-focused accelerators. So they were doing a music one, and Young Guru was involved. And so at that point, I was like, well, I didn't even know accelerators existed. Like, I didn't even know those were a thing at the time. And I got like obsessed with the model. I've always, I've been a founder, I've been an entrepreneur, I've obviously supported entrepreneurs, I've worked in businesses, and so knew that I had, some expertise to share, and had an opportunity to sort of take part, as a partner and mentor in that accelerator. And I think that kind of gave me the energy of really wanting to do that, really wanting to work with founders, really wanting to be aligned with founders, help them get to the place where they can succeed, and later raise money. And so that was the foundation, that was the basis. And then obviously the other side of that was to your point, job creation, career, and things like that. And so we picked those two umbrellas for Be Nimble Foundation. So we focus our efforts on talent, and we focus them on entrepreneurship. Under talent, we actually have our own coding programs and our own training programs that do sales and customer success. We train them usually 30 to 90 day programs, and then we place them into jobs. And that's both jobs locally, outside of Indiana, across the country. And then the entrepreneurship side is an accelerator, now a series of accelerators, and then also workshops and seminars. And so that's how Be Nimble started. That's kind of the foundation and the why I was inspired to start it. And then later, as we, sort of went through class one, and I think got through class two of our accelerator, I think our goal was always to start a fund. I don't think I wanted to do it until way later. Like, even though that we are now in the process of doing it now, like I really didn't see myself doing it for probably another 2 or 3 years, because I really wanted to have a very specific, succinct, really targeted thesis. But I quickly realized that if I didn't start it now, that a lot of companies that I was spending a lot of time with would not be able to raise capital. And so we decided to go ahead and launch that in 2019. So I'll just stop there to start. But that's essentially how, LA, New York all came together to Indiana and Be Nimble.
All right. And that's a good place to kind of spend some time, because you mentioned that part of what Be Nimble does is get people ready for the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it takes for someone to be competitive in today's workforce, not just to get in a company, but to excel when they get there?
So I have a really interesting thought on this. So the reason why, so one thing that we do that is really important, there's two things really, but one is that we chose not to focus all our content on just coding. And it was important for us because our key demographic, the people that we work with, are generally either career transitioners, people that are unemployed, underemployed. And so we're already working with adults that are just looking probably for something new. And so a lot of what we wanted to do is see, like, what transferable skills can we switch over. And a lot of times that's easy, right? Like, a lot of people that are in sales or finance or human resources, it may take just a little bit of massaging, but a lot of times they're able to really show up into roles like that. And then you obviously have your more technical roles where, either you're coming out of a boot camp or you're coming out of a program and you're, being thrown into a role. I personally think that sometimes it's to the detriment of ourselves that we put a lot of the emphasis and impact on what we should do to be prepared. And a lot of times the issues come down to the employers. And that's something that we do. That's the second thing that I really want to highlight, because part of our program is that we don't place anyone at any companies unless we've taken them through anti-racism training, anti-microaggression training, all of those things. And we were doing that way before, pandemic, Black Lives Matter, the whole thing, because the number one thing we refuse to do is place any talent into an environment that would not help them succeed. Because when you're talking about people that are coming from probably a whole different world or transitioning into a new space, they need support and they need patience and they need time to be able to get up to speed on everything. And I think there's this stain a lot of times on, boot camp talent, where it's like, oh, they're kind of rough around the edges, or, oh, they need a little bit more, polish. And I think sometimes it's like, if we really want to diversify our tech workforce, or at least these employers that say they want to diversify their tech workforce, that cannot be an excuse, right? There's a lot of people that get jobs that don't look like us with far less credentials. So let's get that very, very clear.
Right. And I think, it's the thing that everybody defaults to, oh, well, teach people how to code.
Right.
Well,
right.
It's both the hard skills and the soft skills.
Yep.
And what you find is that, if it's not the hard, then it's the soft, right? And so it's to your point, it's training people who oftentimes maybe haven't had experiences in how to move in certain environments. And so the idea is, well, I'm skilled, but that soft side is so critical. What are your thoughts on that?
I think everyone has, hard skills, soft skills stuff, especially if you've never been in a corporate environment. Again, I also think that's why I think a lot of times employers should have some more patience with employees. I know that they're getting paid. I know that they're there to work and to show up and just do their job. But I really think that if we really want to ensure that our our institutions, our organizations are truly diverse, and we are supportive of diversity and we want diversity, that I think employers have to also step up and like kind of shed what they see as a negative and really try to figure out how to support those people. You know, it's easy to hire as many Black people as you want, right? Like you can go to, you know, all of the events, you can go to all the HBCUs, you can scrub LinkedIn, you can, you know, hire 20, you know, Black or Hispanic or Latinx people, right? If they don't stay, that number means nothing. And a lot of times the reason why people don't stay is because of that lack of support, the lack of really great feedback, you know, the microaggressions, they're not feeling like they belong, culture that doesn't really feel like culture. And I think that is the real defining issue when it comes to people staying and then eventually people being promoted. It's a little more than just soft skills at that point. It then is like, what is the employer doing to ensure that their employees are developing correctly as well?
All right. Not as if that isn't a heavy lift enough,
Mm-hmm.
right? At Be Nimble.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, you know, the getting to the venture fund, which you knew was going to be something that came down the road anyway, because, and I hope I quote you correctly, because you just said this, a lot of the founders and companies that were coming to you in the accelerator, you knew that they might run into issues with funding.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about what you were seeing that made you come to that conclusion?
Yeah. So it's a few things. So one, obviously, lack of diversity behind the table. There was no one that was making decisions that were representative of the founders that I work with. And the founders I work with are all Black. You know, right now there are no Black investors at any of the VC firms here in Indiana, at least. So that's one. Two, I think is it was industry. It was really down to industry. So Indianapolis is a tech hub. It's seen as a tech hub. We've had really big companies and really major exits happen, right? We've had ExactTarget get sold to Salesforce. We've had Angie's List and Home Advisor, Interactive Intelligence and Genesis, right? And all of those happen like in the span of like 4 or 5, 6 years. So that's a lot of capital coming to the ecosystem. But with that, when you think about the kinds of companies that those are, they generally tend to kind of sit in that B2B, MarTech, sales tech, marketplace-ish sort of space. And so if you have, you know, you might have some founders that are in that space, but if you also have founders that are, you know, creating consumer focused things or CPG brands or e-commerce or direct to consumer, there's not enough expertise or capital that is going to be able to get them to the next stage. So either they have to look at, you know, other firms outside of the state. I mean, most people are going to start with where they live when they're raising, right? And then eventually, you know, they'll have to go somewhere else. And so I watched at the time that we had moved back and had, you know, had beginning to start thinking about what the fund looks like. I had watched at least 3 or 4 Black founders completely get like passed over for funding of any kind. And I don't blame our local ecosystem. I think they're fantastic. I think their expertise is great. They're open. They always meet with my company. So it's not a nod or a bump against what's here. It's just a nod or a bump against the expertise. My expertise happens to be all consumer. Right. And so there happened to just be an opportunity to have another kind of expertise in the room. And I knew that if I continued to work with the kind of companies that I would work with, they would all end up either being B2B marketing platforms, or, you know, I could, you know, one with myself and then also my network, start bringing in a lot more opportunities and people and connections. And so that is really when I decided that it made sense for us to start the fund sooner, because then we would not lose as many really great ideas, or we would not miss as many potential unicorn opportunities. I mean, I think we missed one with a founder that's currently here. Is an app called Giblify. It's a platform for tithes and offerings for church, and it's electronic, and they've been around for a while. They tried to raise money, couldn't raise, ended up bootstrapping it, and are now, you know, have processed over $2 billion in payments, and couldn't get a single dime of investment, right? And a lot of it was because of not understanding the market, not seeing, you know, Black church as a market, not, you know, having an expertise in apps, right? Like it's consumer driven, right? It's based on people. joining, and then also businesses signing up. So it's this two-sided marketplace.
I completely understand where you're coming from. And so what I heard is, the other person across the table may not necessarily look like you or understand. And then the industries that typically get funding in that particular ecosystem, unless you look like them or adjacent to them in terms of what you're building, the investor might not see the opportunity fully. And you gave that example of the tithes and offering. So in terms of companies that you're accepting into the accelerator, is that process based on companies that you think at some point you might want to fund? Is there a path to that in terms of your selection process, or how are you evaluating startups that enter your accelerator?
Oh, yeah, great question. So yeah, everyone that enters our accelerator, our goal is hopefully that we can fund them. It has to be a good enough idea at the outset that it'd be something that I'd be interested in. There's obviously a ton of other things that come into play when it comes to making those investment decisions, however. But, the one thing that is really important to sort of distinguish is that Be Nimble is the holder of the accelerators and 68 is the capital. And so what happens is now Be Nimble becomes 68 Capital's platform. So it means that no matter who we look at, if they're not ready for investment, we can send them to, the accelerators, or we can send them to our workshops or our seminars, and we never lose anyone in the pipeline. And then if we make an investment, then, we have a built-in, team of mentors and strategy people and, strategic partners that can provide value. And so what we've built is essentially a tried and true proven, platform for founders that will now be supported by more capital. And I think that is something that is not necessarily different, but I do think it's something that is going to provide more help to a lot of founders that are going to need a little bit more hands-on training that maybe, I can't sit on every board. Paul can't sit on every board, but we do have, a team of 12 people that know everything from, retail and CPG to HR and go-to-market strategy. So there's always someone to help. And I think that is what's really going to make sure that our companies end up being super successful.
All right, let's talk a little bit about serendipity in business, because you said this is not a fund that you planned for. So how did the fund side of things come about? What's that story?
Yeah, like I said, I knew I would start a fund, but I started it just for those reasons. I think we came out of the second accelerator class. And it was at that point, we had done a bunch of like VC intros. We did like a special pitch night specifically for VCs and like loved seeing, how impressed they were with some of the companies. One of those companies actually, I don't know, by this airing we'll know, but, was able to get some investment later. But I knew that there was still room for more because not all the companies fit that B2B SaaS, right? I have in my current accelerator, I have a wine company, I have a wine brand, I have a couple of direct to consumer software plays. I have, all sorts of things that may be outside of the scope of a lot of the local VC economy. And so for me, it was really easy to come up with my with my thesis, right? Like 1, Black, Latinx women. 2, industry agnostic, meaning that, we look at everything with the opportunity to potentially invest, so long as there was a road to profitability and potential exit, whatever that may mean to you, because that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And because we come with, I think because a lot of underrepresented founders, and I hate using the word underrepresented, I'll just say Black, but because a lot of Black founders do have a harder time, getting funding, they tend to bootstrap longer, which means that they're able to get a little bit more traction than a lot of other companies that might think about going into accelerators. But they're also really, really cash efficient. And I think that's something that we will be able to take advantage of. Another thing that became really apparent in our thesis and why we chose direct-to-consumer, CPG, and e-commerce is, even though the tech ecosystem is an ecosystem and there's tons of tech companies, there is also an entire entrepreneurial ecosystem out there that may not understand how how venture works, how to get it, what it looks like, if their company is ready for it. And so we also saw it as an opportunity to sort of blur the line between what's tech entrepreneurship and what's regular entrepreneurship. And that is what led us to looking at, direct to consumer brands, the CPG companies. There should be tons of Black Warby Parkers and Everlanes and Allbirds, right? It's all about how you position the company, and what your branding looks like, and how you're utilizing automation, which is also tech enabled. And so we also were able to open up another type of business, another type of investment model that will allow us to tap into deal flow that no one else is paying attention to. So it became a great equalizer for us, to be able to utilize venture capital in a totally different way than what traditionally has been seen.
And I want to dig into this thing of ownership. I think in my mind, until I started to really understand raising funding and giving up equity in return for that funding, I think a lot of times in the minds of people who don't have a lot of experience with venture, one of the things is like, well, ownership means you own it 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to raise funding, you're going to give up that ownership. Let's talk about the good, bad, and the ugly of that raising money and giving up ownership, while still keeping in mind one of the core missions of, kind of why you started this, which is the retention of ownership.
I'm so glad you asked this, because no one ever asked me this question, and I have a very solid opinion about it. So a lot of times venture capital can come off as predatory. I'll say it out loud, right? Like, it's all about how much can you own? Can you get double digit ownership? Like, these are all the things that, us as venture capitalists want, because that means better returns and all these great things. But what we also see are people that continue to raise money and get these high valuations and aren't really building profitable companies, right? Like, we saw that with Uber, we see that with WeWork. So there's something wrong there, right? And so the way that we approach it is, our goal first, and I mentioned this a bit ago, is because we are investing with companies that generally have a little bit more traction or a lot more cash efficient. They raise what they need, but their road to profitability is in a place where all they really need is a round of 2 of investment to scale, and then they become self-sufficient to where they don't have to raise anymore. So the companies that we're investing in most of the time, and hopefully this will be the case, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed, don't have to raise past a Series A, which means they stay not as diluted as they normally would be. I would love for all of our founders to be able to maintain ownership upwards of 50 to 60%. And that's at the low end. Because it is still very important for me that they have ownership, because that is what's going to be the way that wealth is passed down. And I'm not, I want to invest because I see passion in a company or in a founder. I want them to feel like they have ownership in their company. And then I want their employees to make sure they have ownership too. Because when those exits do happen, or when someone is acquired, then everyone is able to win. And I think that's what we need and deserve. I think we have to be a little bit more, in my case, I call it forgiving, right? Of those big sort of fundraisers and putting a lot of capital in a company that may not necessarily need all of that capital. There's some responsibility there. And so the way that we try to maintain ownership is in trying to be as mindful of that as we can.
That's great. And, it's funny that you have to remind kind of the startup world in general that it's important to build profitable companies, right? The fact that folks need to keep going out and raising money and giving up more and more equity is because they can't get to that quickly enough. Mm-hmm. And like you said, the founders that you're finding, because they have no kind of expectation, right, that they're going to be able to go out and raise, they tend to bootstrap longer, and they're further along in getting to profitability than others have to be.
Yep.
Let's talk about
product market fit. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
No, I was just saying the road to product market fit is so much shorter because they spend more time getting there before they even raise, right?
Right.
As opposed to raising when it's just an idea, right? That's why you have to raise so much, because you're like trying to figure it out. You're pre-product, pre-revenue. But when you're a little post-product, post-revenue, then it's like, we just need to build a new product because the MVP works and we know it works, right? Like that becomes really, really interesting, and really fun. And what happens when more of those are happening, right?
Yeah. And we're actually in the market solving problems, and we have customers to prove it, and the customers love us and they want to keep, they're referring to us, we're retaining them, and all of those things. So in terms of where you're pulling startups from for the accelerator and for startups that you're looking to invest in, is this a national fund, a regional fund, or there are particular areas that you're highlighting? And then what are you looking for either if they come to you directly and you like the idea, you like the company, you want to invest, or they go through the accelerator? What's the average check size that you guys are writing?
Yeah, so we are regional. We say between the coast. So for me, that means anywhere, that's not California and probably New York. So we can invest anywhere between the coasts. We do have a focus on Midwest and Southwest because that's where we are. We are on Fund 1, so it's a smaller fund. And so we want to focus more on, sort of Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky, in our kind of our stratosphere, our circle of influence that we're right next to. And our initial check sizes are anywhere between 200 and 500. And we can do follow on upwards of 350 to 750, I believe, in some of our winners. So we are able to follow on a bit. And, I am an open book. Anybody that reaches out to me, more likely than not, can usually get a meeting with me. I'm really not hard to find. I usually will meet with anybody. So the getting to me is not hard ever. Because we're in kind of the tail end of finishing our raise, it takes a little bit longer. I've only technically made one commitment so far, because we are still kind of on the tail end of finishing things up. But once we are finished, I imagine our process should take no more than 2 or 3 weeks tops. So we can get people in and out. They can come through the accelerator. I mean, obviously that's how a lot of people come to us. They know about us because of Be Nimble first, and they find out about 68 Capital later. I spent a lot of time, building a lot of really great relationships over the last three or 4 years, before we kind of finish this fund. And so, have kind of these built-in networks of just founders and people and companies and friends that send me people all the time. And so finding companies is actually not as hard as I think a lot of people make it seem. Maybe it's just because I stay outside and I'm always looking for people, but finding them is great. I think also being formerly a Techstars keeps me really tapped in into all the companies that are going through Techstars. And so I try my best to mentor as many as I can and meet with as many as I can and help, my old PM and MD buddies if they need recommendations of companies. I also did VC Unlocked, which means I'm now tapped into the 500 Startups network. And so I also get to, kind of pull from my peers, which is really great. And that's really been helpful too, because with having other people that are, Fund 1, Fund 2, also focused on diverse investing, that's opportunity for us to co-invest. So a lot of times we are bringing opportunities to each other. Which is also really cool. So yeah, it's coming from all sides, but it's not hard to find me and not hard to get in touch with me at all.
That's great. And speaking of getting in touch with you, so if somebody's listening to this interview, they see some of the content that we're going to put out after this, and they want to participate in the accelerator, or they want to pitch you their idea or their company, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so email is always fine. I'm Kelli at 68. It's very hard to mouth that. So it's the word 60, the number 8 .capital. That's my email. And then I'm everywhere online, in LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at Kelli Nicole. It's Kelli with an I, Nicole with a K.
Okay, great. There you have it, guys. You have the history. You have the companies that she's working on. You have her investment thesis. We have basically, and Kelli has basically provided you everything you need in order to be able to reach out to her, to engage with her, whether you're ready to join the accelerator, whether you have a company to pitch. Like she said, she is an open book with wide experience, right? And she's industry agnostic, and she has a fund and she's looking to deploy capital. This will be my last question. and this is again a bit of serendipity. Last week I sat down with Sam Badu of Flurry.
Ah.
He was on last Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
And then I look up and I see, and this is the same day that I think he participated in your pitch competition. And he actually won. And the thing that stuck out to me was that he received, I think it was $15,000 with no dilution.
No, none.
And you know, people talk about what their values are, but even before we had this conversation, your values were already on display. And we just explored the issue of ownership and ownership retention. And so that's just a sign that, you know, Kelli is the kind of person who, you know, sticks by her word, and she demonstrates that in the real world. Now, that's a little bit of praise. I wanted to ask you about this. Okay. This is my last question. Companies solving problems on the continent. There's this idea that in the diaspora, right, Africans or people of African descent, Black people in America, in Europe, Asia, etc., tend to solve problems for where they live. But we understand that the continent on the rise, just as, you know, over the last 2 decades, it has been Asia. We understand that the next frontier is Africa. What are you seeing in terms of your portfolio or companies like Flurry, who's trying to solve the issue of health and health insurance in Africa? What are you seeing, and would you like to see more of it?
Let me preface all of this by saying, so my retirement plan is actually to move to Ghana. So I am very invested in the continent. And the reason why is, I don't know how many people know this, but Ghana has the most fertile land in the world. And so I've always wanted to like have my own farm and like just kind of live, right? And so that's always been my like, I'm going to retire. I'm done with life. I've done all the things. Like, that's what I plan to do. So I plan to literally live the rest of my life in Africa. And so when I think about the types of companies we want to invest in, obviously we invest only in the US. So we don't currently invest overseas yet, not for this fund. Hopefully we will soon, maybe on a fund too. But I am very tapped into what is going on in Africa and keep my eyes and ears to the street of what's happening on the continent, which means I get the privilege of meeting and talking to a lot of founders that are building things specifically for the continent. And so that is just really important to me. I remember the first time I talked to Sam, because we got introed, I believe by Rev1 Ventures introduced us. And first meeting, like we talked, I usually set 30-minute meetings. We talked, he told me what he was doing. I asked my questions. I said, hey, technically my accelerator is closed. Like the applications are closed, but I'd love for you to participate. So can you apply? And I'd love to have you. And he did, and Sam is super smart. I think what he's doing is top notch. And I don't even think he understands the magnitude of the possibility of growth of what he has on his hands. And because he does it with such grace and with such just, I don't want to say humble, because humble is not the word I like to use, but I mean, it is humility, right? He just wants to solve a problem, and it's super clear. And I think it was clear to our judges. I think it was clear to our audience. It's definitely been clear to our accelerator class for this year of what he's doing. And so it's important for me to look at and invest at anything that's helping what's happening over in Africa, because I don't see anything but opportunity. And if that's where I plan to live, it's gotta be up to par with how it needs to be. So I'm betting all my money on Black, no matter what country. Okay.
Hey, listen, we're going to end it on that. We couldn't have ended it on a better note. And folks, this has been Miss Kelli Jones of Be Nimble Foundation and 68 Capital. And I got to leave you guys with my one takeaway. And the thing that's resounding with me the most is ownership. Bootstrapping isn't the thing that a lot of people think is, their first option. But demonstrated by the companies that go through the accelerator and the companies that are funded by 68 Capital. Bootstrap as long as you can. Try to get as much traction as you can. And the payoff for paying that cost up front is the retention of ownership long term. Thank you for joining us on another episode. Peace.